Yo, what up, dummies? It's the weekend, so of course it is time again for another anime streaming showcase. We are past the summer of A.S.S. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a fun little series, but we are now in fall. Technically, by temperatures, you may not be able to say that wherever you are. Thankfully, where I am, the temperature is nice. But anyway, we're here to talk about a show that was one of the first shows I experienced outside of a Toonami bubble that I was in back in the early aughts. We're going to look at a show called Tenjho Tenge, and it's a pretty over-the-top action show, and I think it's held up pretty well, but it's not exactly the greatest action show of all time, but it's still pretty fun and it's widely available, so let's check it out. Back in 2005, I was working at a movie theater in the projectionist booth, and when we weren't spooling movies and starting flicks, a coworker and I kicked back and watched anime. It ranged from shows like Berserk and Rurouni Kenshin to Hikaru no Go and various others. Some I'd heard of, some that were completely foreign to me. My friend and I would spend many nights watching these .avi or .mkv files on his laptop as our shift continued, devouring and exploring many series along the way. Unfortunately, that friend, as what happens with most jobs, had moved on and our anime nights went with him. I would personally like to thank this friend, John, for introducing me further to what the anime industry had to offer past Adult Swim and Toonami. Thanks to John, I've since gone on to develop my anime tastes and preferences better, as he taught me to go outside my comfort zone and test new genres, demographics, and various other styles. But there was always a show that John showed me that we never finished, and I never retained its name until a few years later. And that series was called Tenjho Tenge. From its bombastic opening to its ludicrously over-the-top action and martial arts, I was instantly hooked, and I will never forget how brutal of an action show it was and how much it blew me away. Todo Academy is home to many reckless gangs and students housing various martial arts and talents. One day, new freshmen Nagi Suichiro and Bob Makihara arrive to take it over and claim Todo as their own turf. Little do Nagi and Bob know that the executive council on grounds strictly enforce the school's rules, and despite Nagi and Bob's talents, it's just not enough. Enter the Juken Club and its leader Maya Natsube and her sister Aya Natsube, who, alongside with Masataka Takayanagi, take Nagi and Bob under their wings to train them up against the Executive Council. We then enter the meat of Tenjho Tenge, as the remainder of the show is a combination of fights, love triangles or squares or hexagons. It's a bit convoluted sometimes with the love angles. And a bulk of flashback arc that contains the exposition and explanation for all the fighting happening at Todo. The series' strengths lie in a number of areas, depending on each viewer, but the most prominently discussed attribute is the fights. The various battles and styles borrow heavily from a number of martial arts, like capoeira, jeet kune do, or just straight up brawling. The visceral, brutal action has always left an impact, as it draws and its speed lines emphasize numerous moments. Occasionally, some of the fights or attacks border on the absurd and the unbelievable, but an amount of them are grounded in a reality that satisfies more than perplexes. If vicious violence isn't enough for you, that's okay, as the series offers up enough TNA for a year's worth of anime. Clothes will shred, buxom babes will lavishly spread themselves before everyone, and convenient placement of items will obscure their naughtier bits. Tenge is rife with sexual overtones and breast bouncing, the level of not quite misogyny, more objectification, as many of the women in the series can and will kick ass, but they'll often be presented as lovable objects over fully defined characters. And that's one of the biggest peeves that I have with the series. Characters are often all over the place with their motives and their goals. Aya Natsume is the greatest component of this annoyance, as she's happier succumbing to being nothing more than Nagi's wife over being a competent fighter. She's naive one moment, then a destructive beast the next, but her character type is so obnoxious that it wears thin almost immediately. Perhaps it's my personality that leads me away from Aya and towards her older sister Maya as a more respectable female character, but I do think Maya is a better, more well-rounded character in relation to Aya. As big as a peeve that Aya is, the remainder of the show mostly makes up for a weak main character. The flow is generally quick, with plentiful battles and fights spread out, with a hefty flashback arc that takes up a fair amount of time too. Some might say too much, as the series' biggest drawback ultimately, there's no real or satisfying explicit ending. Like many popular manga series, this suffers from getting an anime adaptation before the manga was over or further enough along to reach a conclusion. The series ends before any real climax, and despite a 2-episode OVA series following later, no satisfying finale occurs there either. This is sadly a common occurrence in a lot of anime series adapted from ongoing manga series. Although it seems to have lessened lately, or at the very least production companies have not been able to ensure they're not starting production too soon on a hot series, but part of me believes that finality is important to a series. It's urgent if the viewer gets an opening, a middle, and an end. Most certainly in a series that aren't standalone non-secular shows. If you do believe that the idea of an anime is simply to be an advertisement for manga and light novels, then the idea makes sense, but it isn't exactly fair to me from a viewer's standpoint. It's certainly enough content for the investment, sure, but promoting a series as complete or as one that presents itself as a full idea only to provide an incomplete story isn't really forgivable. An anime original ending is an attempt to fulfill the idea, but once we learn it's not exactly the canon ending, it tarnishes it, for me anyway. So while Tenjho Tenge doesn't wrap up with an anime original ending, it doesn't end in a fashion that leaves a positive impression either. If you're not up for ruthless violence, scantily clad, and mostly poorly developed female characters, and you just want an inconclusive ending, then this series will not be for you. This is hardly a series that retains its legacy from over 10 years ago as I remember it, but if you can get past the questionable content, you can find an entertaining and fun show. And remember, I've always said that a fun show is a big component for me with most. And Tenjho Tenge clicks that box for me, even if it's not as ultimately enjoyable in a modern mindset. When all I had seen before this was shows like DBZ and similar shows, Tenjho Tenge was a nice addition to that genre and entertaining then, but having varied and expanded my taste, as well as witnessing far superior series, this simply falls flat by comparison. If you do at least want to give it a go, check out Crunchyroll as they offer the series subbed and dubbed, an uncommon feature for them, so you can discern Tenjho Tenge's worth for yourself. So there we have it. Brand new episode of Anime Streaming Showcase. Thank you for joining me. This series was an important series for me. I may have come off on a little bit too harshly, but I do think modern sensibilities compared to the show's 10-year plus old legacy, it's going to be hard to separate the show from that, for me at least. I do think it's still enjoyable, it's still watchable, and if you can get past some of the questionable ideas inside, you will find at least a fun action show. And for 26 episodes, it's really not a big waste of time or anything like that. I do think it's worthwhile. I've actually only heard the subbed version of this show. I do know that a dub exists, but I have not watched it. I imagine it's fine, although it probably hasn't aged well, given that whenever it was recorded, it was probably around the same time, 2006, 2007 maybe, so it may not hold up as well, but both options are there. You can check them out for yourself and decide. I definitely think it's a worthwhile show. Maybe give it the 3-episode rule. If you're not feeling it after 3 episodes, you can drop it. No harm done. And with that, I am going to bid you adieu. And it is the weekend. I'm going to play Cuphead because that game is rad, while all of you people probably play your SNES classics. And shut up, I'm not jealous in any way. So we will see you next time on Anime Streaming Showcase. You guys have a great weekend. As always, thanks for joining me, and we will see you again, nerds. Later.